Well, hi. So, on this rainy Saturday here, got to thinking about a neat story um, called Beware the King, Beware the Fool. Okay? It goes something like this. So, there was a good king in ancient times, and he had 12 sons. He had a set of triplets, he had two sets of twins. Okay? And the others were all of single births. But he had 12 sons. And when they were military age, his kingdom was challenged. And it was challenged from three sides. First, from the north, the very hostile north, and then from the east, and then from the south. And he committed to battle to preserve his lands. And it looked something like this arrangement. Okay. He had his kingdom here. These were also his lands. To the west, he had three distinct states, which he had in reserve for his three oldest sons. Now, during the course of this war, though, in defending his lands from the hostile north, the opportunistic east and south, his sons succumbed to battle, and he lost 9 of them. He did win the war, but at the cost of 9 of his sons and much of his population. It was a victory, but it was a Pyrrhic victory. He called extensively for help from an ally of his, just to the west, who was quite prosperous and whose prosperity owed much to this good king. This ally, immediately to the west, had 3 vassal states, which were not as prosperous as the good king's lands, but he enjoyed his security because he was basically inaccessible without going through the good king's land. He knew that he was in a good position, and he had no worries as long as the good king kept up the fight. And he did not help him, even though he had pledged to. While these lands were in a state of disrepair and people were recovering from the war, yet still hostile one with another, the word spread throughout the land to the westward that the good king's heart had failed him. In retreat from the hostile borderlands and in apparent abandonment of the main country, the 3 remaining sons decided each to take up one of these bordering states closer to the protection of their ally. And they were invited by the king over here in blue to come closer, and he would give them each a daughter of his to marry. But he supposed that these 3 remaining sons, being the youngest, were pressed into service and did not have much training to be kings because they were the youngest. And so these 3 youngest sons, all of their affairs were run by this king's daughters. And he turned them into vassal states. And they controlled somewhat of this country of their fathers, but not securely. And they requested help from the king, and he did not help them, but he did request and got much of their resources, and he kept them producing for him. And this king very much enjoyed the subjugation of others, and he enjoyed seeing people in a state of humiliation. And there came a time when a fool staggered into town and was just hilarious in his display and his mannerisms and how he could witfully stitch together jokes and matters of other hilarity that people just were struck by. And so this fool one day was out and had a crowd about him, and the king came by to see him, and he was in rags and tatters, and he noticed that this fool was just hilarious, and he made the king laugh. And the king told him he must come to his court, and he must be his entertainment between the droll murmurings of the people asking for this and for that and for things that he did not want to provide, but yet he had to tolerate them because they were his subjects, and he recognized that they did offer means of support, however meager, from one to the next. In total, it was a fair living. And so he brought the fool with him, and the fool was obliged to go. The fool began to call him master. And the fool increased in popularity in his court and gained notoriety for his boldness in addressing members of the court and chiding them and goading them, but making it just so undeniably hilarious that he was given a pass to do it. And he got bolder and bolder and bolder. And he also got to the point where he would goose the king every once in a while. And the king didn't like that at first, but he found that it was pretty enjoyable, actually, to just get caught off guard and to laugh himself sick at this stupid fool. One day, at a time of collection of tributes and taxes, the 3 sons from these middle areas came in and requested from this king, "Please support us with military. We're weak, and we have encroachments here that we cannot defend against for much longer. We really need your help." The king looked at them, and he told them to go away and don't trouble him unless the threat was at his door. Meaning they needed to fight until their lands had laid to waste before he would help. And taking the opportunity to seize on the moment and witfully rouse the king again, the fool took up a sword and said, "Isn't it true, great king, that one can challenge you and in direct combat, if victorious, could actually be the king?" And the fool was apparently drunk and staggering and dragging the sword from himself to the floor and dropping it and picking it up again. And the king thought this hilarious. Everyone thought it was hilarious, and they were laughing so hard. And the king said, "Why, yes, do you want to engage me in direct combat, you fool?" And the fool said, Yes, of course I do." And he dragged his sword over to the king, and he smacked the garment of the king, and the king was laughing so hard he just couldn't help himself. And the fool said, "Do you accept this single combat?" And the king said, "Yes, sure, why not?" And the fool chopped that king's head off so fast it hit the floor, and everyone was still laughing. And they weren't paying attention. And people started to realize, oh shit, he just cut the king's head off. And the fool stood up straight and held the sword, and he was challenged by the king's guard who approached. And he said, "Do not come near me, I am the king now. I have by direct single combat defeated this king, and this is now my kingdom by law." the king's guard, the former king, the dead king, their guard looked at each other. They said, that cannot be. That cannot be. This is not the way this is done. This is illegal. This is by some kind of ruse that you have done this. You have lied to get here. And the fool stood up and said, I am a king. And I came in here at invitation by him. And he who would not help me, I am the king of the East. And they said, that's a lie. The king of the East, his heart had failed him when his sons had died in combat. And his kingdom fell into disrepair. You cannot be him. He is dead. And the fool said, not so. It was announced, and word was sent that the king's heart had failed him. But it did not say that he died. And they all looked at each other, and they convened a court immediately and brought in the king's court to try the case, while the fool was still standing there with sword in hand and the dead king on the ground. And the 3 sons took up their swords and went and stood before him and said, you will not harm our father the king, and this is rightfully his kingdom. And there were soldiers who pressed in from the outside to bring in the king's court and their judges. And so there began a standoff between the 3 sons, the fool of the king, and everyone else. And the whole case was heard. And they recounted, did he offer any false representations of his request for single combat? Did he sneak up on the king? Was it murder? No. It was found that he clearly stated that he was going to engage the king in single combat. Clearly stated. And the king accepted knowingly. And he had sword in hand too. So on this, and thereafter, it became known as a word of wisdom. Beware the fool. Beware the king. Because it could not be said and it could not be judged harshly of him that he had wrongfully taken that kingdom. This is the king who had sworn to protect him and to offer support as an ally. And he didn't show up. This king went and took the payment of that which was due him, despite having lost his own country. And the king did go on, took this other king's army, and went back and retook his country too. Then they died for his country. What's the moral of the story, man? Well, sometimes if there's some kind of a fool telling you they're going to do exactly what they're going to do, maybe they're going to fucking do it. Beware the fool. Beware the king.